Hello, I'm Bruce Zimmerman, and this is the Open Line Garden Show podcast for this week. Now, this past weekend, I was at the Oshawa Valley Botanical Gardens and their Peony Festival. Now, being a person who's been sort of, how shall I say, in the business a long time, peonies have become sort of passé. And, they really don't turn you crank. But I have to admit, there was a lot of people there. And I have never seen so many displays of cut peonies from different classes, different types, all on display and to be judged. And some really, really spectacular ones, but also some great prizes were done. And given to some of the best in shows were definitely best in show. I was very pleased with that in the fact that it was open, it was airy, it could handle the volume of people. Very often, sometimes I like to squeeze some of these events into a smaller area, but by using the whole area of like a rink, it meant that people could walk around, look, stop, take pictures, etc. And it was very well done. Parking was free, and you could wander the botanical gardens, and I enjoyed that too. It's nice to have a quiet time to walk with my wife and maybe sit on a park bench and, have a nice quiet moment or two, which doesn't happen too often, to be honest. So it was very, very enjoyable day. And I really enjoyed it, and it was well worth the trip. So let's talk a little bit about peonies. Now, I've got peonies in my garden. I was sort of, okay, I'll put a few in, etc. And so I put them in, and it turns out that they're fragrant, which is, in some cases, not unusual. There are a number of peonies that are fragrant, some very fragrant, some overpoweringly fragrant, some very lightly scented. Mine are sort of more on the lightly scented areas. When they're in full bloom, they can be a little much, okay, if you're standing right there. Most of the peonies that people get are the anemone type, which is more of the open with the yellow stamens in the center. There's singles, which is just basically that with a lot less of the yellow stamens in the center. Doubles. Most people, I think, like the doubles. They like the really full-looking ones, and that's what I've got, but they're bicolor. The stamens on the center are modified to be a creamy, whitey pink, and the outer petals, the guard petals, are much, much stronger pink. So it's a very pretty one as well. So I divided one of them this spring. So some lucky person's going to be able to get buy one, okay, from my garden at the garage sale for CFBU this July. So that should be fun. But there's only one, and we'll see what happens. Most of the plants get to be about 3 feet tall. Some are better strength in stems, so they don't fall over. But most have a tendency to really splay over, so you really do need peony cages. I mean, that's what they were invented for. As they get older and bigger, then you have to understand that might end up being like some people use rebar and put in rebar stakes and wire it around so they have the strength to actually hold up the stems with the flowers on them. Season of bloom on these herbaceous peonies, basically late spring, early summer. There are early, mid-season, and late blooming ones, which means you could have about 6 weeks of bloom in your garden with peonies, but you'd have to have a number of them to really make it a show in order to cover the full 6 weeks. Remember, and this is extremely important, well-drained soil and deep and fertile. If it's too much shade, they won't flower or flower very poorly. If they get a lot of competition from tree roots, won't like that either. And, of course, late spring freezes, something like some of the early blooming magnolias we talked about. So, yeah, those are the things you need to know. But also, that it's important that you realize that the peony stems not be planted more than 1 to 2 inches down. The tubers or rhizomes, if you do that and you plant them too deep, even if they survive, what happens is they never bloom. And I mean never, okay? Peonies are tough. They don't get a lot of problems. Once established in the garden, particularly the older varieties, you'll see them in deserted old farmhouses and barns and yards, etc., and old gardens, simply because even though maybe the house hasn't survived, the peony has. And so, yeah, they are tough. They are fairly hardy. You are looking at a range. Now, when you get to a warm end, you got to be careful because once you get to the warm end of the scale, they don't get enough chilling hours to really produce flowers. So probably zone 3 to about zone 7, maybe 8 if you've got some altitude and some cold. So try that as well. There are a couple other groups that I think you should look for, and that is, of course, the fern-leaf peonies, the tenuifolia, which comes in a single red and a double red flower, and again, hardy to zone 3 to 8. Now, they're much smaller. They bloom and then they're done, but they have this very ferny foliage. They're harder to grow. They're more demanding on their soils and their conditions. They are much slower to grow, so therefore don't plan on them being such that they are going to be divided many times and you're going to be able to give them off to your friends. No, okay? And they are harder to grow. I've had peony experts tell me they have a hard time growing the tenuifolia varieties. I have several in my garden. I've divided them. I've grown them for many years, and they do require that type of care. Very popular in Asia. You'll see them in old-time paintings and silk tapestries, etc., with the peonies, particularly the anemones and the singles. So they are a plant that maybe we should start rethinking again. They make a good mid-border plant that's reliable, dependable, a good filler, and easily other plants to go around it, as long as you do a good, strong peony cage. Because when they splay over, they create enough shade, they can actually shade out other perennials. So make sure that you're prepared to put on a decent cage. All of that being said, I think the Oshawa Valley Botanical Gardens show was spectacular. They have several hundred actual peony plants out on display and in bloom, all different colors, etc. Now, they had a couple of the Itoth peonies, which are more the yellows, which are a hybrid, basically, between tree peonies and herbaceous peonies. Tree peonies are different in the fact that they're woody and they do not, how shall I say this, they don't die down to the ground. And as a result, you're going to have a little different. They're grafted on herbaceous peony roots. They're planted down so that eventually they root onto the tree peony root stems. But again, they don't like wind. They don't like a lot of sun in the hot afternoons. And they will bloom, and they do get quite tall, maybe as much as 5. I have seen a few get to 6 feet, depending on varieties. Great colors, but if you can get some of these yellow and the Itoth series ones, they're much smaller, they're slower, they're very expensive, and but very, very pretty and well worth it. So take a look at those as well. I'm Bruce Zimmerman. This is the Open Line Garden Show podcast for this week.